everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar in our Great International Education and Schools Fair. And today's webinar is Why Transition Care Matters in Schools. And I'm delighted to hand over to you now to our host, Jayne Constantinis. Over to you, Jayne.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm delighted to be here again hosting this event, part of this month-long programme of events, activities and content to help you navigate the currently especially challenging landscape of education and relocation. And, you know, I think with all that's going on in the world, all the very particular challenges that people are facing, I think this is a very timely event because it really is full of practical and useful advice and ideas and strategies. Today we have a fantastic group of experts in transition care, and we really are a global group. We're dialing in from Kent, not quite so glamorous, London, Switzerland, Australia and Taipei. Let me introduce you to our guests. Valérie Besanceney is an international educator and transition consultant and author with 15 years teaching experience. She's passionate about helping families thrive through transitions. She's Dutch by birth, Swiss by nationality, and she moved around as a child herself, so she really understands the challenges and the impact of early transitions. Valérie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jayne.
Jayne Barron is a youth intercultural transition specialist, an educator, a researcher, speaker, and author. She's got 27 years experience in international and local schools. She's also a parent of 2 cross-cultural kids herself, and she knows from her own experience what it's like to have a mobile childhood. Claudine Hakim is an educator, head of advancement, transitions and student support at the International School of London, ISL. She's lived in 3 continents and she's passionate as well about fostering well-balanced and inclusive international communities. Claudine, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And Ryan Haynes is Director of Upper School Academic and Personal Counselling at the Taipei American School, TAS. He's also lived in Oman and Thailand, and he spent 2 decades of his career as an international schools counsellor, helping hundreds of students and families through the transition process. He is also raising 2 cross-cultural kids, and he was one himself. And they are all board members of SPAN, which is Safe Passage Across Networks, and they'll tell you more about that in due course. So a very warm welcome to all of you. In a moment, we're going to hear from Jayne, Claudine and Ryan. But first, I'd like to begin by asking Valérie to spend a few minutes telling us about her personal experience. Valérie, over to you.
Thank you, Jayne. So I grew up as what we call quintessential TCK. I moved around several times before the age of 18 due to my parents' job. And I moved between international schools and Dutch local schools. And even though I always found it challenging to leave a place, I was always excited about the new adventures ahead. And at the time, I never thought I had any issues with moving around a lot. I adapted very easily socially to the school systems. And I was also constantly reminded about the privilege of growing up in that sense internationally. And I truly felt like I was incredibly privileged. And even though I did stay very much connected to Holland, I did feel less and less of an attachment to Holland. And as I was graduating from the American system and the UK system in an international school, I wanted passionately to attend college in the States. And that's where I probably had the biggest culture shock ever, because even though I thought I'd be fine because I spoke the language fine, I had tons of American friends, I hadn't quite anticipated that actually going there wouldn't be the same as being in an international school. And that's where I really started questioning, who am I, where do I belong? And realizing that I pretty much had no idea. So it was this big identity crisis in my early 20s. And after finishing my studies there, I still had no idea where I wanted to go, where I wanted to be. And that pool to just keep moving was much bigger. So that's what I kept doing. And I ended up doing a master's in education. And while I was doing that, while I started out doing that, I was teaching in Myanmar and Burma. And at the time, that's where I first read the book, Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds. And I had my big, as many of us do when reading that book, that big aha moment of, finally, somebody understands. And that's exactly how I felt. And it was really, for me, then I just started researching as much as possible. And as a teacher, I became really interested in how mobility affected learning as well. And as I was researching, I was realizing there was quite a lot of literature available to adults, but there was nothing really there for children. So that's when I thought, well, I'll write my own story in the hope that other children can identify with that. And by doing that, I wrote Be at Home, Emma Moves Again, and I wrote it from two voices. So one from the perspective of a 10-year-old girl who's going through all the roller coaster of emotions while moving. And then each chapter, the second part, is written from the perspective of her teddy bear, which is the voice of reason. And in that, I really wanted to ensure that I was comforting children and not just encouraging them, where I was letting them know it was okay to have that roller coaster of emotions. It was okay to feel angry and upset and sad, and at the same time excited. And that it was okay not to feel like you had to belong to one place or one culture. So as I started writing that, I was also pregnant with our oldest child, who's 9 now, and I really wanted her as well to grow up with strong attachments to multiple cultures, where she didn't have to choose. My husband's American, as we mentioned. I'm Dutch by birth, but meanwhile have become Swiss. So that's where the story really came from. It, but I also wanted to give children that emotional language to express their emotions and work through the grief that accompanies all these losses when you do have to say goodbye multiple times in your life, so that it turns into good grief and not, as we call, unresolved grief, which is what I was really struggling with in my 20s. And I didn't really even realize how much I was struggling with that unresolved grief until I attended my first Families in Global Transition conference, and where I met Ryan and Doug Oda. And that's really where I realized how much work could be done as well in terms of helping students thrive through transitions. So that's where I became involved with Safe Passage Across Networks, and then joined the SPAN conference in 2017, which was right before the Families in Global Transition conference. And that's where I also met Jayne and Claudine and other board members. And as I continued my work as a teacher in school, in the book Be at Home, Emma receives what she calls a moving booklet from her teacher. Now, I never received that growing up, even though I had some amazing teachers who did help me through that whole journey. But I always created this little, printed out PDF form of a moving booklet where children could kind of describe their own moving story. And then colleagues at school started saying, well, where's the moving booklet? Because you know how to do this, make one for us so we can use it. So that's where that second activity book came from. And then, and as we were a bilingual school, they encouraged me to get it translated into French. So that's where the books were really born from. And as I work with children as well, the one message that I really like to give them, because I think it's such an important one, is that it's really worth investing in relationships when you're moving around so often. Because I think a lot of children experience what we call relationship fatigue early on, because they get so used to the idea of like, well, here I go again. Is it worth it? I mean, we might be moving in a year or 2 years again anyway, or the kids that I just met yesterday might be moving at the end of the school year. And I do think it's so worth it. And I have a story that I always like to share, and there's a picture that goes with it, where my friend Fiona and I, we met when we were, I think, 3 years old probably, and we only lived in one place together for 1 year in this little tiny town in Holland. And she also came from a bicultural family, and so she moved around a lot. I moved around a lot. We only spent that 1 year together in one town, but we always stayed in touch, and we always, I mean, at the time wrote each other long letters. We went on family vacations together. Sometimes it'd be months that we didn't hear from each other, and sometimes even years, until in 2015 she called me up and out of the blue a little bit and said, guess what, we're moving to Geneva. So we were able to spend again 2 years living in the same place. And the picture below are 2 daughters, our eldest. At the time we were both pregnant with our second daughters, and the 4 of them have now formed a really tight bond as well. So it's just to say that it's always worth investing in those new friendships, no matter what. So that's really my journey of how I became passionate about helping others thrive through transitions. And meanwhile, I had the privilege of joining the SPAN board a few years ago, and I'm really invested in our work together as well. So I'm very happy to be here together with Ryan, Claudine, and Jayne.
Valérie, that's such a fascinating journey that you've been on. What response do you get nowadays to the books from children in particular?
Lovely responses. I mean, I sometimes get unexpected emails from children themselves, which is really always the best. When they say, oh, it was so nice to read your book, and I really can identify with Emma and what she was going through, and I felt the same way, or I didn't feel the same way, which I think is important as well. To be so much easier to say that about somebody else and really expressing your own feelings sometimes, and from parents as well, and sometimes they send me little pictures of how they filled in the moving booklets, which is always quite special.
And there we've got details of the books and the website.
Yes.
Let's get Jayne, Claudine, and Ryan involved now. And you've shared with us how you got involved in the world of transition. Ryan, I wonder if you could start by telling us about your journey into this world.
Sure. I was working in Oman, and I had a colleague who, well, actually, I was serving as her counseling mentor, and she had told me about this conference that she had been attending in Houston called Families in Global Transition, FIGT. And so when I was working in Oman, I was a department of one. I was the only counselor, and I just could not take the time to attend that conference, but it really intrigued me. And so once I moved back to Bangkok and I was in a larger counseling office, one of the first things I told him, I said, in terms of professional development, I really want to attend this conference. And so I did. And I tell you, Jayne, I met my tribe. I got to that conference, and it just, and what was really special about it, it was in the Washington, D.C. area where I'm from. So I invited my mom. So my mom attended as well, because I really wanted my mom to get a sense of who her grandchildren are. I have 2 boys, and I really want her to get a sense of, who are TCKs, who are TCKs, and she raised one herself unknowingly. And so went to that conference, and it was fantastic. It really got a sense of people who really get transitions and global mobility, and just the importance of that. And so and that's where I met Valérie. Then the following year met Doug Oda. He was one of the keynote speakers there. So and also raising 2 TCKs myself. I mean, just selfishly, I'm invested in and interested in the subject, and also working as a counselor in international schools. I mean, being able to transition well is so important. Vitally important.
Do you know, that word tribe is so interesting. It comes up again and again in these sessions. Jayne, what about you? Tell us how you got involved in this world.
Yes, well, very interestingly, I was teaching at an international school in Southeast Asia. I had a beautiful class of grade 4 students, and there was about 4 of them who just had blockages in their learning. And I knew it wasn't cognitive, I knew it wasn't behavioral, but I just couldn't put my finger on what the cause was. And as I came alongside these students and tried to understand their story, there was a pattern. And with each of them, it was around mobility. They had all moved. And in hindsight now, I look back and I think, you know what? I think I identified with these students because I had also moved around a lot as a child, although within Australia. But I think there was an affinity there. And so I began asking my colleagues who had been in international education much longer than I had, is this a thing? And they all said, no, not that we know of. We don't know anything about it. And I, a bit like Valerie was saying, I went on a mission to find research. Okay, surely this has to be a thing, that mobility impacts learning. And at that point in time, there was only one piece of research, which was by Dr. John Hattie, but I had also just finished my Masters of Education, and I had read a lot of Dr. Barbara Shatey's work. And so I contacted her and I said, who is doing this transition program thing well? You know, which schools are doing this? Because certainly the international school where I was, there was no transition care program in place. And she put me in contact with Doug Otter and said, the American School of The Hague is doing it. You need to contact Doug Otter. So I did that. One thing led to another. And the next thing I knew, I was traveling 9 time zones to get to the Families in Global Transition Conference in Amsterdam. I walked in and knew not a single soul there, but met Doug, met Ryan, and then the rest is history. And actually on that trip also, I connected with Claudine at ISL and went and visited their school, because on their website they had a fantastic page all about transitions, and I was like, I need to go to this school. This school gets it. And so that was the beginning of my journey, and so since then, yes, the rest is history.
So Claudine, you obviously realized this was a thing very early on.
Absolutely. Like Jayne, I fell into it in a certain way because I joined International School of London in 2009, and we'd already had one campus, which is the mother school in London, and then another campus that I was involved with in setting up in Surrey. And in our London campus, some of you may be familiar with him. Dr. Richard Pearce had written a lot, involved with the University of Bath, had written a lot on interculturalism and the impact on mobility. So our school had already started that journey. But the person that inspired me the most was one of my colleagues. He was the head of primary, who had been to ASH, to the American School of The Hague, and met Doug Otter. And this was as far back as 2009, and had heard all about their transitions program and shared it with me. And with a background in psychology and someone who's always put at the heart of everything the well-being of our community in whichever environment I've been in, it really resonated with why this is important. And then one thing led to another, reading John Hattie's book on visible learning and the importance of putting at the care, the transition of a family and ensuring that it doesn't impact negatively on learning. As an educator, that also spoke to me. And one of my colleagues mentioned the FIGT. Doug Otter was going to be a keynote speaker. Off I went, and like the rest of our team, the rest is history. I found my tribe as well, and put in place, realized very quickly that lots of schools have a transitions program but don't realize they do, and it's not structured. And they put in place various elements, but what takes it to the next level is when you make it a part of your DNA, when you embrace it and you say, this is what we believe in, putting the well-being of our community comes first, and then looking at how do we do that. And that's the passion that's driven me the last 12 years.
Claudine, I'm going to ask you to elaborate in a bit of detail about what your program actually consists of. But first of all, I was very struck by something Valerie said earlier about unresolved grief, and that she only realized that others were feeling what she was feeling when she read that book in her 20s. Why? And Jayne, I'd like to start with you on this. I think that demonstrates that this is important. It is important that international schools get this right. But why in particular is it important?
Yes, it is very important. Well, international schools by their very nature are places of transience, although even though in recent years we've seen a considerable increase in local enrolments in many international schools as governments ease restrictions on enrolment demographics, they really do remain the most popular educational platform for families in global transition. And with transition to or from a new location or school comes those goodbyes that Valerie was talking about before, and hellos, and the grief and the loss associated with that, and well, change. And moving between educational cultures results in teachers and students presenting and expecting different learning styles, different classroom and playground behaviours, and teacher-student relationships. And at the heart of transition, it really impacts our emotions. And we know, thanks to the work by the likes of researchers such as Imordino Yang, that our emotions are like a shelf upon which our cognitive glassware sits. And without that solid shelf, our learning and our thinking really has less support. So you might think that this relates to students learning only, but I would actually argue that teachers' ability to teach is impacted by transition in the same way that students' learning is impacted also. So in answer to your question, transition really provides a remarkable opportunity to equip, support and empower international school community members, that's students, parents and staff, to really engage in the process of transition so that it activates and enhances learning and life, so that, in the words of our SPAN founder and chairperson Doug Otter, who we have referred to a lot tonight or today, teachers can teach well, parents can parent well, and students can learn well. And of course, COVID-19 has shown us that change really is our constant companion. So we need these skills to manage in all aspects of life, really. So whether you're a student or a family or a staff member arriving, leaving, or the one being left behind, international schools really have a responsibility and a platform to facilitate learning opportunities and care that equips their school community members to really effectively navigate in the triumphs and trials of transition, whatever the context.
Ryan, the way Jayne's described it there, it's not just a nice to have, it's essential.
Oh, without a doubt. Let's just focus on students. If students don't transition well, there's no way learning is going to take place. And if families don't transition well, parents won't be able to support their children at home. And let's be honest, international school education is a business, and many administrators, parents see their schools as a brand. And if a school is not delivering, it will establish a reputation that is harmful to its brand. So just from a business model alone, I mean, transition is important, but in terms of just learning and the support that parents and families can provide their students, it's vitally important.
Claudine, tell us, if you would, about your program. And Jayne referred to you earlier as what we might call an early adopter. What processes do you have in place for the students and their families?
Absolutely. The first thing we did was come together as a leadership team and identify what makes our team, our transitions team. So we have in the forefront, I'm the head of transition. So there's somebody named as taking ownership of this. There's a team of people, because to have an effective program, everybody in the community is involved. It's intertwined. It's not one group of people, whether it's the PTA looking after the parent side, the students and having their voice, and equally the staff voice as well. So involvement from HR, etc. And you have a group, a committee, who look at that journey of any member of our community. So what's the journey from the moment they make contact with our school to the moment they leave, and map it out. And that's something we'll be talking about next week. It's actually on the 24th, where we'll be doing a case study on our school and going into more detail about this. What's critical is understanding what everyone has said. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if your basic needs are not met, then you can't, reach self-actualization and learning, et cetera, et cetera. And if everybody accepts that as a given, then it becomes obvious. And then all the practices that schools have been doing, whether it's orientation day or whether it's welcoming families and connecting them with the class reps, all these are rituals and activities and programs schools do naturally. But if they put the theory of why this is important and then evaluate what they're doing, then it starts to put in place ensuring that every element and every aspect of the school school's community has been thought about. We, for instance, have 22 languages that we offer in our school as part of our curriculum. We're an IB school, which means we then attract some families with zero English. And so how do you then embrace them into the community and make them feel they belong and feel that they are part of this? And so we've had committees with language reps, ensuring that we reach out to the people and no one feels left out and that they feel part of the community.
And I know you're too modest to refer to it yourself, but you've won Relocate awards for your approach to supporting international students.
It was really a privilege to have that honor, because we had been putting these programs in place for a while, but having that acknowledgement from outside bodies and the relocation world was really an honor. But the biggest honor for us was the testimonials from our students, our staff, and our parents, because they endorsed that the program we put in place for them in their entire journey with us made a difference. And that really was the biggest honor for us. And we thank Relocate for having this opportunity to even reflect and just even going through the process of writing up why we should be considered for the award in itself. That process in itself was rewarding and affirming and helped us fine-tune and improve what we do.
Valérie, Claudine mentioned languages there. What was your experience, obviously before these processes were in place, of arriving at a new school, perhaps with little or no language?
It was difficult because the first time I moved away from Holland, I was 5 years old, and my parents had actually we were moving from the Netherlands to Zurich, and my parents have had intensive German language classes for about 6 months before we left, and to their great disappointment, because it was Hochdeutsch German, they arrived in Zurich and realized that everybody spoke Schweizerdeutsch, which is pretty much a language of its own. So and they, had prepared me that I would be going to an English-speaking school, but everybody, including the school itself, had assured my parents, "Don't worry about it; she'll be fine. We'll give her extra English lessons, no problem. She's young; she'll learn quickly." And all that happened, except that on the very first day, I had nothing, and so I had to go to the bathroom, and I didn't know how to ask to go to the bathroom. So I tried to get my teacher's attention, but she was busy, and I left because I really had to go, and found the bathroom eventually. I had to wander around the school a bit and found it, but meanwhile, of course, my teacher was in panic mode because she realized very quickly I was missing, and the new girl went missing. So then she found me, and then she introduced me to this other Dutch girl, who then asked me, "Well, why did you leave the room?" And what? And so I explained, "Well, I needed a bathroom." And then the Dutch girl said to me, "But there's a bathroom in the classroom. It's that door." Nobody had mentioned that. So was everybody did everything with the best of intentions, my parents, the teachers, the school, but it's these little things that are really, really important.
Oh, that's heartbreaking to think of that little 5-year-old desperate for the loo. Ryan, have you got big signs on all of the bathrooms for the students who arrive? Perhaps it's not their native language. What do you do in your school?
So in our school, let me just begin by saying it helps having a head of school who gets it, who is very supportive of transitions and who attended Doug Oder's workshop when he came to Taipei American School back in, I believe it was 2018 that we hosted. So having her on board and the director of admissions and the divisional administrators as well is great. It helps to have their support. So what we have in place, each division, counselors are heavily involved in the transitions process, and each division, with the exception, well, the middle school and upper school that I'm in, we have student ambassadors. And so prior to a student's arrival, we have the file and the student new info, and we try to match up students' current or student ambassadors with the new students based upon interest, where they're coming from in the world. And so then our focused on the upper school, then our student ambassadors called Reach Out. The Reach Out buddies will reach out to those students prior to arriving, and then upon arrival, take them through their schedules, give them tours of schools, and then for us, and then for the counselors, we have different orientation programs or meetings for parents and students. We have our intake where we try to map out their schedules and just get to know them better. Obviously, that had changed this past summer due to COVID, where we shifted to online. A lot of our work was online. Met with many Zoom meetings with families and students. Had students conduct their placement test online, submit, because lots of times students will come here and do their math placement test and do a writing. Writing placement, but we were able to have students just submit writing samples from where they were coming from, and our heads of department were very, very flexible. I mean, we had to be, and so as a result, we were able to do that, and also many of our families came at different times. I mean, we're fortunate here in Taiwan. Taiwan's done a fantastic job managing the virus. That's why we have a record number of new families this year, because so many people want to come to Taiwan. So we were fortunate. Many families were on island, but for others, they couldn't get visas, or we have some new students that just arrived a couple weeks ago. So again, staggered arrivals. Everybody has been very flexible. We've been in communication with students and families prior to their arrival. Students have been in contact with teachers, so it really has been a total team effort, and just got to be flexible during these times. And kudos to the admissions department and to our heads of department as well, and how we've all welcomed and transitioned the different families.
Yeah. Thank you for providing that lovely segue into the pandemic. I wish I had a penny for every time the word flexible and adaptable has been used in the context of how we're all having to get on with life. What has been the impact, Claudine, on your school of the pandemic and the families who are transitioning?
That's been sort of the story of our life for the last 9 months, I believe. We started off by being prepared for what's to come, and that's thanks to the vision of our head of school. He had contacts with various international heads around the world, and had already seen what was happening in Hong Kong, and China, where they had already gone into lockdown. And so we were ready for what was to come, and actually turned and became a virtual school about 10 days before the UK was forced into lockdown and everybody had to do so. So we were, by the scenario planning and by regrouping as a leadership team and looking at what's to come, helped us prepare and plan. and then decide what we needed to do for each section of our school. So we put together a well-being team, which fell under the transitions program, and said, what will the teachers need? What are the students going to need? And what are the parents going to need at this time? And split out responsibilities to do so. For example, for our teachers, we put in place a clinical surgery in the evening where dealing with suddenly having to manage working, teaching, and looking after their child all in one space. The story that we've heard over and over again over the last month. They need an outlet to be able to share the stresses and frustrations. So our school counselor was offering every evening from 7 to 8, almost like a surgery. You can dial in, have a chat, and then offered one-to-one as needed, for that. For the parents, we have a member of our community who's also in our transitions team representing the PTA. He's also a trained family therapist. So we put in place workshops for parents on how to support them during this time, and equally did some work with our students. This is for the community we have, but then what do you do with the families knocking on your door? Yeah. It's now May in the UK, everything's closed, and a family wants to join the school. We actually had 3 families join us in May, as late as May, because of the transit nature that Jayne spoke about. We will have ongoing admissions throughout the year. 2 of the students were actually in the UK, but were not able to join the school physically because we'd gone virtual. And 1 was overseas, had left their other school and had intended to come to us. So obviously everybody was in the virtual world, but we needed to go that extra mile to stay connected. So we ensured one of our students was Japanese, spoke no English, was about to join a school he'd never seen, and how to do that. And we made sure that our head of languages met with the family, our Japanese parent rep met with the family via Zoom, and also our Japanese teacher met with the student. And we modified that student's program so that the first 2 weeks of joining was more about orientation virtually and understanding who we are, and even translated some of the concepts and program of the IB into Japanese in order for him to have that orientation, and linked that student with other students who spoke his language, and then provided English classes, introduction to English classes in the first 3 weeks. And after that had him join the typical program that he would have had. So all that required extra planning. It wasn't things that we hadn't done before, but it did mean personalizing it for every single family or student coming in and ensuring that happens. The feedback we got was that really made a difference to those families. I gave you one example, but there are many, and regular surveys, reaching out to our parents, keeping the communication going, helped us also modify and adapt what we were doing. At one point, because we were offering virtual learning throughout, as if they were in school, but had not taken into the consideration what it's like when you finish a lesson, walk down the corridor, and have a comfort break indirectly, even your brain, and then you go into the next class. Going from one lesson to the other, boom, boom, virtually, was exhausting. And so after a week of doing it and having the feedback from the parents and the students, we adapted and started to put breaks into what we were offering. So adapting, being flexible, and being creative were all necessary, and staying connected were all the necessary things we had to put in place. And thankfully that helped us keep the families happy and our staff as happy as can be under the circumstances.
Yes, quite, yeah. That personalisation that you described sounds amazing. Jayne, what's been your observation of the impact that the pandemic has had?
Yes, well, as Claudine just highlighted so magnificently there, it has just added so many extra layers of complications and uncertainty, and particularly around transition. So in the work that we have been doing with schools and families across the globe, we're seeing parents really wanting research-based practical strategies to help them transition to new locations and to schools, and particularly, as Claudine just identified, where campuses are closed or where the pandemic infection rate is at high levels. You know, there's families that are quarantining in small hotel rooms, and then their children are trying to navigate that home learning and that new learning management system and new languages, as Claudine just mentioned, while parents are trying to work and get all the practical elements such as phone connections, employment passes, where the shipping is, you know, where the shipment's coming to and what the arrival dates are. And it's exhausting, absolutely exhausting for all family members. So it's really challenging to arrive in a new location and not be able to meet people, for students and families. So the workshops that we've been running have really been focusing on self-care first, around that whole analogy of, you know, back in the days when we used to be able to fly on aeroplanes, put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. So we've done a lot of work around self-care and practical transition strategies, and particularly also tips for juggling home learning and work and household commitments, all while trying to include opportunities for virtual connection. And these are elements that we have been consistently receiving very positive feedback from parents. In fact, one parent who works in the wellbeing space actually said that she found our workshops to be healing. So that's just an example of some of the things that are going on to support parents that we've observed.
Valerie, you popped out of the room and you're back again, which is great. I think you're back. Great.
Yes.
You've obviously talked very eloquently about how challenging transition is in the best of times. These are far from the best of times. What do you think are the particular challenges for families now during the pandemic?
I think what Claudine briefly mentioned before as well, and Jayne touched upon it as well, but I think the biggest challenge right now is for families to adjust to this new reality that at any given moment we may find ourselves in another lockdown, and where you need to shift from wearing your parent hat to being a teacher to continuing your own professional activities. Many parents having to do that, you know, within the same space even that they're sharing with their children then. And I think that has brought about a lot of questions, about a lot of challenges, a lot of tensions in families, and how to work around that, how to establish some new ground rules on how to work together from home, how to be together from home when certain parent is, you know, on call, when if you are, you know, if you have the luxury of having both parents there, because there's also, of course, the single parents who are struggling even more in that situation. So it's I think it's where we've all tried to manage the quick transition of having to deal with the situation that came out of being in lockdown, thinking it was temporary. And then it going into, for many people, turning into something that may last for this entire academic school year, and just having to adjust to that new reality.
I think one of the things that's come out of this is we are all in awe of educators and teachers, and that may be a good thing, that we value them appropriately at the end of this pandemic. Claudine, you spoke a moment ago about how you're supporting your teachers. I want to ask Ryan about what's going on in your school. What sort of support do teachers need? What are they asking for?
They're asking for a break. To speak frankly, just we're tired. I mean, So we're fortunate here in Taiwan. We shut down twice briefly once in February for 2 weeks after Chinese New Year, and then for 10 days after spring break. We've been in school since April. I mean, we were able to have a graduation, socially distanced, of course, summer break, and then we started right on schedule back in August. And so for all of us not able to get off island and not have those annual traditions of going home wherever home is, people are tired. People are tired. And so fortunately, at the beginning of the school year, again, the head of school, the respective principals in different divisions told faculty, look, we know that all of us weren't able to go home. You're tired. Use your sick days if you need them. To take care of yourselves. As counselors, we've been checking in frequently with faculty members. Fortunately, our school, we're affiliated with a community services center just down the street, where any member of the community who's affiliated with Taipei American School can have 6 free counseling sessions, and so teachers have been using that. Just really encouraging teachers to practice self-care and to take care of themselves.
I think the whole world is tired. We're all tired of being on Zoom, aren't we? Or the equivalent platform. And as you said, Claudine, the business of back-to-back, I mean, this is not just in the world of education, but in the working world generally, the back-to-back meetings is totally draining. And I think people are starting to understand what's needed a little bit more now, because this isn't going away, is it?
No.
For the next few months, we hope. We think that we've got a light at the end of the tunnel, but we've still got a little way to go yet. Let's move away from the pandemic, if we can, and get back to more general ideas around transition. And I want to ask you one very simple question. And Valerie, I'm going to start with you. What's the impact if schools and families get it wrong? What's the impact for their children?
Well, I think it depends. It definitely depends on every child, because I think every child reacts differently. But I think, just like with what I experienced with my own transition and moving around at an early age, and when there weren't those systems in place yet to really help manage those transitions, it just manifests later in life because it just adds up. And I think now schools are starting to understand how important it is. But now we're also seeing how important it is to address all these mini transitions happening due to the pandemic, just to touch briefly back on that. But I think that's one of the reasons as well, where, when you're talking about the teacher fatigue and all of that where Safe Passage has created this online gathering. Initially it was twice a month, now it's once a month, of the Nest, to allow teachers to come in, and every session there's a short plenary where it's on timely transition themes, but then also allows for people to connect in breakout rooms and to really just kind of re-energize each other a little bit. And I think right now the biggest thing we really do need to watch out for is that complete exhaustion, and that people need to stay connected with schools with their families, and the families with their children.
And Jayne, it's same question to you. What's the implication of not getting it right? But also, it's not just about international transition, is it?
That's absolutely right. And my experience, so Valerie was talking about her experience, and I was nodding so much because although I moved around a lot within Australia, I had 7 different school moves during my elementary and secondary education. And every single move meant saying goodbye, and having to start all over again. And you were talking about actually different, the languages before. Well, in Australia, we all speak English, but I'm here to tell you that every single school I went to had its own sub-language, its own colloquial language. And I walked into every school and had to relearn what the way of speaking and the vernacular and so on and so forth. So it whether you're crossing country borders, crossing state borders, crossing between rural and city, or even in my case, between home and boarding school also, there are so many challenges that are associated, because you are really going into a whole new culture. And so schools and families that really understand that and understand the importance of supporting emotions and providing support mechanisms to really navigate all of those challenges are the ones that their students are the ones that are thriving within the learning context, within the social context, within the emotional context.
So it's clear that many schools are doing a good job. I was really struck by something, Valerie, you said earlier. You talked about parents comforting, not encouraging their children, and the business of, you know, something that we all learn as parents and try to put into practice, the idea of validating our children's emotions, and sometimes the fact that they're feeling things that we wish they weren't feeling, and we want that to stop. What would you say is something very practical and tangible that parents can do to support these transitioning children?
I think that's, I mean, you said it in a way yourself, but the ability to let your children go through the emotions, and not, because it's so tempting to want to take the pain away, right? And it's so tempting to say, oh, but you're going to be fine, and you're going to, but to really let them go through it, and also give them that language to talk it through, because a lot of the times they feel emotions that they just don't have the words for. And I think if parents can model that emotional language more, and even use little stories that happen within their family, and really articulate how they are feeling at certain times, and especially right now with all the uncertainty that's happening in the world, I think also, again, parents want to just kind of comfort the kids and encourage the kids as well, and say, well, you know, everything is going to be okay. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that we don't know how things are going to be okay, but that we can let our children know, we're here for you, we're here to listen to you, and this is what I'm feeling right now, and this is what that means. How are you feeling? Does that, you know, do you recognize that, or do you feel something else? Because I don't think it's ever too early to have those conversations with children. I think you can start that from when they're infants.
I couldn't agree more with Valerie. Evangelos Raptis, who is our one of our parents, but he's also a family therapist. When he was doing workshops for our parents, when he addressed the issue of giving permission to ourselves to say we're struggling too, and it's okay, was in a way relieved our parents a lot, to say we're all in this together, and to be able to say that to their children as well, and providing them with the tools. And I think it really helped in being able to manage the situation, then also manage, in our case, going back into school again, but the parents not being able to come into school. So the children are now being able to reconnect in London, but as a community, that's not happening. And then looking at fun ways to try and have the parents connect virtually, you know, with all the GDPR rules and not being able to share out numbers and whatever, the school had to play a key role in providing opportunities and events and workshops that can bring the community together. But that validation that Valerie spoke about, I think even for me as a parent with a 4-year-old made a big difference, where I could say to her, you know, this is tough even for mommy and daddy.
Ryan, is that something that you encourage for your families as well, that sort of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up and say, Claudine had said, providing parents with the tools, also by being able to model a successful transition, or that you're struggling, and being able to model positively how you're working through it.
Yes.
That we've been encouraging parents to do that with our parent education, because I mean, modeling, I mean, parents, we're our children's first teachers, and so if we can model and be upfront and honest with what we're experiencing, that can go a long way.
We're very sadly coming towards the end of our time together. I wish we could go on for the whole of the rest of the day. We spent a lot of time looking back, and we've talked about the pandemic. Let's look ahead, hopefully to brighter times, but still probably a difficult year ahead. I wonder if you can give us your thoughts on how you think the next year is going to evolve and what the particular challenges are going to be, and how parents perhaps who are watching this can meet those challenges. Jayne, I wonder if I can start with you on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think one thing that COVID has taught us is that we have been thrust into transition, whether we like it or not. And so as a result of that, I think schools really have a responsibility to go back and look at how they are supporting their school community, their students, their parents and their staff. And in the research that we just launched yesterday, and actually is being showcased on Monday at 10 a.m, I think UK time, as part of the fair, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
We found that actually the majority of international schools have no formal way of assessing the success of their transition program. And of those with an alumni program, very few of them use.
Oh, yes. Jayne's left the room, but I think she'll be back in a moment and we can hear from her. We'll hear the rest of what she was going to say. Claudine, I wonder if you can pick up on that question, and then we'll go back to Jayne when she returns. I think she's gone for a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Absolutely. Well, it's being flexible and adaptable, as we're demonstrating right now.
Yeah.
This is going to be an ongoing thing for us, I think, in the next year. And if there was one word or one thing I would say, it's to be kind to ourselves, to keep us going.
Kind to ourselves and kind to everybody else.
Yes,
lovely. Ryan, while we're waiting for Jayne to finish her cup of tea, your thoughts on the next 12 months, particular challenges and tools for thriving?
Being able to think outside the box, just to provide a few examples. So when we returned to school last year, initially we weren't going to have graduation. And just due to social distancing and just different, and our head of school at the time, just her own fears regarding the pandemic. But I give the upper school admin a lot of credit because they worked with the seniors, and so they were able to. They had lots of meetings. What did the seniors want in terms of like their rites of passages, annual traditions? So by working together, they're able to have graduation outdoors, outside social distancing that was able to go on and take place. Different, I guess, senior traditions were still able to take place, obviously modified.
Yeah.
And so just due to the creativity, a great example this year, we have an annual dance that's open to all grades 9 through 12, but it can only have a certain number of people indoors. So instead, our dean of students, who's also a SPAN board member, Dan Long, who's just wonderful at creating community. What he did, he and the school, we rented out an amusement park. And so instead of having this annual dance, we had a Halloween party outdoors. So there's no social distancing limits in place in terms of how many people we can have in an auditorium or something. So we had a wonderful Halloween party that was open to the entire upper school, and that's going to become an annual tradition now.
Yeah.
So thanks to forward thinking and creativity and being able to communicate with student leadership, we had a successful event. So just being open and thinking outside the box and really being open to all possibilities.
Yeah, brilliant.
Always embracing some of those changes and holding on to some of those changes.
Yeah.
Right.
Jayne, you popped off for a quick cup of tea and a biscuit. So thanks for coming back. Do you want to finish what you were saying about the next 12 months and the challenges?
Where did I get up to? I looked and all of a sudden you weren't there anymore. So just to quickly recap, what I was just saying was when we're talking about the future, really, I feel that schools need to evaluate what they have in place now and see whether it's really working or not, because as we've talked so much through our session today, you know, this is the new normal of constant change. And so we need to make sure that we are equipping each population within our school communities in an effective way to navigate change. And so now's the time to be evaluating what we have in place and use that as a foundation for all the things that we've spoken about today to be put into place.
Thank you. And Valerie, what about you and the next 12 months? What do you see happening?
Well, I think that the last 9 months have shown how incredibly important well-being is for everyone. And I really think that that's, you know, that schools really need to ensure that not just their teachers, their admin, their counselors, but also the parents are really encouraged to practice self-care as mindfully as they can so that we can best support our students and make sure that their well-being is prioritized as well.
Yeah. And of course, friendships and our social circle are a big part of that. One of the other lovely things from your opening remarks, Valerie, was your friendship, this long-lasting friendship that now has spilled over into your daughters. That's a very special thing. How did that happen? And what can parents who are watching this do to help their children have the same experience that you did?
I think you can encourage your children to find ways to connect with their friends. And I one really nice example as well, because I think even our children are getting a lot of Zoom fatigue just talking to their friends. And sometimes, you know, especially at the younger ages, they sit there and like, well, what are we supposed to talk about? Because it's not the same as playing outside together or doing something together. But if you can also work around, like for our oldest daughter, one of her friends actually initiated a book club online. And she took her new friends to play moved to and her old friends and some other friends, and they now meet once a month for an hour, you know, with the parents nearby, but just to, and of course they only end up talking about the book for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, but it doesn't matter. It gives them a reason to start that conversation. And then they go off and actually feel like they have a free-flowing, fun conversation as they talk. And as a parent listening in, it was just fascinating because they were all talking about how lucky some of them were to do contact sports, and so how some of them had to wear masks all day long and how others didn't. And it was really actually fascinating to hear that very genuine conversation about the pandemic and transitions and all of that coming out of the mouths of 9-year-olds. So it's just setting the stage a little bit and helping them and encouraging them and just making sure that you give them plenty of opportunities to stay connected.
Yeah, I think that's how every book club works, isn't it? You have 5 minutes on the book and the rest of the time gossiping.
Usually there's some drinking involved.
Sorry, say that again, Ryan.
Usually there's some drinking involved as well.
Oh, indeed, but not up to the 9-year-olds, we hope.
Right.
That's another webinar altogether. Very, very sadly, we are out of time. Thank you so much to our guests, Valerie, Jayne, Claudine and Ryan for sharing with us your personal stories and giving, I think, some very practical and useful guidance for parents watching. You can find out more about SPAN on the website, which is spanschools.org. Jayne already mentioned that she's going to be talking about her new research on Monday the 16th at 10 o'clock UK time. And Claudine is also going to be joining us again towards the end of the month to talk in some detail about the ISL transition programme. So 2 events to really look forward to there. There are a multitude of resources on this great International Education and Schools Fair month. You can, on how you can get involved, how you can catch up on some of the webinars that you've missed, perhaps even watch this one again. All of that's on the Relocate website, and details coming up on a slide in a moment. Fiona, you have been listening and nodding and smiling all along. Tell us, though, what you've got coming up for the rest of the programme next week and beyond.
Well, we've got a really exciting week next week, and building on this wonderfully energetic session today. So as you just heard, Jane, Barron and Ellen Mahoney are going to be talking about their research. That's on Monday. We've got a wonderful school, the Bridge School, who are offering fully online education. That will be on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, delighted to welcome Clarissa Farr, who has written a book called The Making of Us, Why Schools Matter. And then we're going to have the panel discussion about single sex or co-ed. So that's going to be a lively discussion, I'm sure. So catch up with that one. And then Educating Global Citizens. This will be a series of these, and this is about the challenges and opportunities of raising children in an international environment. And there's a lot of focus on Asia with this one on Thursday. And then we've got next week, of course, the following week, the last week of the fair, we do have the wonderful Crossroads ISL transition programme. So those who have enjoyed this session will be bound to get a lot from that. So a packed programme. So thank you very much to you all for contributing so wholeheartedly.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona, and a big thank you to Valerie, Jane, Claudine and Ryan. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation as well, and thank you for watching. We'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.